Today, the Senate passed a new set of sanctions on both Russia and Iran. We're gonna get to Iran in just a second, but let's talk about some of these new sanctions on Russia. They would impose new sanctions on, this is from the press briefing, by the way, this isn't our language. Corrupt Russian actors. I think they don't mean in theater. I think they mean regular actors.
No, some of those guys might be in Julius Caesar.
They might be. Yeah. Those seeking to evade sanctions, which sort of makes sense. Those involved in serious human rights abuses. Those supplying weapons to Assad in Syria. Those conducting the cyber attacks on behalf of the Russian government. Those involved in corrupt privatization of state-owned assets. Oh, come on, that's not happening in Russia. And those doing business with Russian intelligence and defense sectors. It would also allow sanctions to be moved into areas like mining, metals, shipping, and railways. So these are significant new sets of sanctions. There's some other sets as well. We're gonna gloss over these because we are running a little bit low on time. But what's most interesting about this bill, which just passed, isn't necessarily the new sanctions, but the new oversight that Congress is going to have over the continuance of the sanctions. It establishes a review process for Congress to have a say when the White House seeks to ease or remove Russia sanctions. And look, a lot of people are concerned about what effect some sort of deal involving the sanctions being eased might have had during the election. People are concerned about that, and he has certainly seemed oddly interested in getting rid of those sanctions during his first 4 months as president. We've already heard from diplomats in the State Department that there have been multiple times when they've tried to put pressure on the State Department to independently call for the sanctions to be erased, and Congress is saying that they want to be a part of that. And so if he tries to do it, assuming it passes the House and isn't vetoed by President Trump, if he tries to do that in the future, they will be able to stop it theoretically.
Hard to veto a bill that passed the Senate 97-2.
97-2.
Do we know who the two? I forgot to look.
We do actually. So let's get to that in just 1 second. But in reference to what I was just saying,
Mike Lee and Rand Paul, right?
Exactly. Well, that was the amendment. So I'll break that down in just a second. Chuck Schumer, describing this new set of oversight rules, says we move to make the Congress, not the president, the final arbiter of sanctions relief when necessary. Any idea of the president that he can lift sanctions on his own for whatever reason are dashed by this legislation. And so originally, they had this set of sanctions on Iran that was going to be put into effect, and they wanted to move the Russia sanctions into that package. And so there were 2 votes against that. That was Mike Lee and Rand Paul. So then you have the final set of sanctions on both Russia and Iran. 2 people voted against that. Rand Paul still voted against it. The other vote, Bernie Sanders, interestingly. And so why was that? So we've got his statement on this. And remember, this is sanctions on both Russia and Iran. So here's what he said.
Together or separately?
Together in one package.
Right.
And again, it still has to go to the House before the president theoretically could veto it or sign it. Bernie Sanders said this: I am strongly supportive of the sanctions on Russia included in this bill. It is unacceptable for Russia to interfere in our elections here in the US or anywhere around the world. There must be consequences for such actions. But he goes on to say, I'm also very worried about Iran and their actions of late, and he theoretically thinks something needs to be done about that. And he says, I have voted for sanctions on Iran in the past, and I believe sanctions were an important tool for bringing Iran to the negotiating table, referring to the nuclear treaty of just a couple of years ago. I believe that these new sanctions could endanger the very important nuclear agreement that was signed between the US, its partners, and Iran in 2015. That is not a risk worth taking. And so he apparently supports the Russia set of these sanctions, but he believes that putting these new sanctions on Iran could theoretically cause them to feel like staying in that tree is not worth it anymore. And if they were to back out, then they could resume their efforts to build ballistic missile technology as well as nuclear weapons.
Yeah, he sees the value in actually having a treaty with Iran, which is what a statesman would think.
Yeah.
This won't pass the House. I don't know, which makes it a little bit irrelevant, so it'll get watered down somewhat. But there's no way that Donald Trump doesn't argue that this undermines his executive authority. I mean, arguably,
he'll like the Iran portion of it.
He'll like the
he hates that deal,
right? But that doesn't matter because he can probably get the Senate to vote on the Iran part separately if he needed to.
That could be a way that they try to kill it.
But Democrats will try and put them together, obviously. Now, the whole way you win this battle is politically. That's what the problem is that there's now a 97-2 vote on record, and so when
which you probably won't see another until the end of
right.
Trump's
That's
presidency.
the kind of vote that comes about like should the congressional baseball game continue. That would be 97-2.
Yes.
Rand Paul would oddly also vote against that.
Remember, he was there.
He was there. I know.
He was there.
Yeah, but we shouldn't have this game.
Yeah, not a fan.
So anyway.
So look, I don't know. Indication has come out from a spokesperson for Paul Ryan saying he was a vocal proponent of the last round of sanctions and believes we must do more to hold Russia accountable. But that doesn't mean that he couldn't do what you're alluding to and separate it or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. That's but it's past the House, and then
he still does have to. But interestingly, today John Kerry also put out a statement echoing much of what Bernie Sanders said about the Iran portion of the sanctions, saying that this would risk Iran pulling out of that treaty, which is dangerous for a number of different reasons.
All right.
So that is one thing to consider. We're still early in the process, though, but just wanted to get you updated.
What do you get for Young Turks membership? It's a mystery. Only one way to find out. TYTnetwork.com/join.